Gas stations are dry. Power outages roll across entire cities. Supermarket shelves are half-stocked, if the goods even arrive. Across Asia, millions are beginning to ask, what just changed? This isn't a natural disaster. It's the ripple effect of new U.S. sanctions, and the economic shock is real. Nations already stretched thin are now suffocating under frozen assets, blockade, and collapsing currencies. Could your country be next? With rising inflation, shuttered industries, and skyrocketing unemployment, 10 Asian countries now teeter on the edge. Stick around, because these aren't warnings from a distant future. They're headlines from today. And the clock is ticking. Number 10. Iran. Gas exports are plummeting, the currency is in freefall, and entire cities are flickering between light and blackout on a daily basis. Iran's economy is suffocating under some of the most aggressive U.S. sanctions yet. In 2025, new restrictions didn't just hit oil exports. They targeted the very arteries that keep foreign currency flowing, intermediaries in China, India, and beyond. Over 70% of Iran's export earnings depend on crude, and with buyers pulling back, the financial noose is tightening fast. Inflation has already surpassed 40%. The Iranian rial has lost more than 80% of its value in just 3 years. Today, daily essentials, bread, fuel, medicine, are luxuries for millions. And here's the brutal truth. Without oil, Iran doesn't just stall, it starves. The government can't fund subsidies, pay wages, or stabilize food prices. Is Iran approaching the point of no return? Because in places like this, collapse doesn't start with explosions. It begins with silence in the markets. Number 9. North Korea. Missiles grab headlines, but it's the empty markets and dimming power grids that tell the real story. North Korea is in deep crisis, and the new U.S. sanctions of 2025 are pushing it closer to the edge. Its few remaining lifelines, like limited trade with China, are being squeezed. The regime is struggling to import fuel, medicine, and basic food supplies. The black market, once a lifeline, is drying up. Malnutrition is on the rise. Entire provinces experience rolling blackouts. And whispers from defectors speak of unpaid soldiers and collapsing infrastructure. Can North Korea endure another economic blow? Before we move on, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share so we can keep exposing the stories others are afraid to tell. Because if North Korea collapses, it won't be with a bang. It'll be a slow, silent unraveling. And that unraveling may already be underway. Number 8. Myanmar. A country rich in jade, oil, and natural gas. Yet many families can't afford a single bag of rice. Myanmar is unraveling at an alarming rate. And with new U.S. sanctions in 2025, it's now dangerously close to total collapse. But here's the thing, Myanmar was already on life support. A military junta that seized power in 2021 has isolated the nation. Foreign investment? Gone. Tourism? Dead. Basic banking? Unreliable. With sanctions now targeting state-owned enterprises, particularly in the energy sector, even the last economic engines are sputtering. What does that mean on the ground? The Myanmar kyat has lost over 60% of its value in 2 years. Inflation is above 25%. Fuel shortages are routine. In cities like Yangon and Mandalay, power outages last up to 12 hours a day. But in rural heartlands, it's even worse, no electricity, no medicine, barely any food. One of the most devastating consequences? A total breakdown in public health. Myanmar is battling outbreaks of drug-resistant malaria and tuberculosis. But hospitals are overwhelmed, underfunded, or completely shut down. Meanwhile, the military diverts resources to suppress dissent instead of rebuilding the economy. Here's the kicker. Myanmar still has rich natural resources. But with the junta in power and sanctions choking off legal trade, it's become a shadow state, trading under the table, bleeding talent, and suffocating under its own instability. Could Myanmar survive another shock? Another natural disaster? A currency crash or cyber attack? When a nation's future is held hostage by a cornered regime, and its people are severed from both democracy and development, collapse might not make headlines. It might just happen quietly, completely, and soon. Number 7. Syria. One loaf of bread now costs more than an average day's wage. The lights flicker, then vanish. In some neighborhoods, water runs only once a week. Syria's collapse didn't start in 2025, but this year's wave of U.S. sanctions may seal its fate. These new sanctions target oil production, telecommunications, and foreign remittances, cutting deeper than any airstrike. And while the war may have faded from headlines, its effects linger. Over 90% of Syrians live below the poverty line. The Syrian pound has lost more than 99% of its value since 2011. Fuel and food are either unaffordable or completely unavailable. Hospitals operate without power. Pharmacies have empty shelves. And here's what's new. Sanctions in 2025 expanded to include third-party brokers and regional banks that once helped Syria access international markets. Even informal routes for aid and trade are now breaking down. This isn't just isolation anymore, it's economic asphyxiation. The ripple effect is shattering. Families are fleeing, not from bombs, but from starvation. Teachers are street vendors. Engineers beg in the streets. The youth are either silent or gone. Can any nation endure this long without a functioning economy, a stable currency, or external support? Syria may be answering that very question. And before we get to the next name on the list, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so we can continue bringing you the deeper, unfiltered truths from the corners of the world that the headlines ignore. Because what's happening in Syria isn't just a crisis, it's the slow, grinding erasure of a nation rich in history, talent, and potential. And if nothing changes, that erasure could soon be complete. Number 6. Afghanistan. How long can a country survive without a working central bank, international recognition, or access to its own reserves? Afghanistan isn't just poor, it's frozen. And the expanded U.S. sanctions of 2025 are making that freeze lethal. With more than $7 billion in Afghan central bank reserves still blocked abroad, the economy is being strangled from the top down. What does collapse look like here? Children sold for food. Hospitals turning patients away for lack of basic supplies. University graduates working for bread instead of wages. Since the Taliban took over in 2021, the economy has shrunk by over 30%. Foreign aid, once funding 75% of the national budget, is now nearly non-existent. With sanctions tightening in 2025, even humanitarian organizations are struggling to legally deliver supplies. And here's the cruel irony. Afghanistan is rich in resources, precious metals, rare earths, untapped trade routes. But no nation will invest under Taliban rule. Banking is a nightmare. Businesses run on cash, or not at all. Women, once vital to the health and education sectors, have been erased from the workforce. But the biggest blow? The informal economy, once a lifeline, is crumbling too. Smuggling, remittances, underground trade, they barely kept things afloat. But now, even those are faltering under regional crackdowns triggered by international pressure. Even today, the World Food Programme warns that 1 in every 3 Afghans is grappling with severe food insecurity. And this crisis isn't confined to rural regions. Urban centers like Kabul and Herat are also unraveling, squeezed by soaring inflation, dwindling supplies, and growing international isolation. Is Afghanistan now just a state in name? Institutions are empty shells, the economy barely functions, and the population is trapped in stagnation. When collapse becomes a way of life, recovery can begin to look unreachable. Number 5. Yemen. What does it mean for a nation to collapse when there's barely anything left to crumble? Yemen isn't on the edge of failure. It's enduring one of the longest, most drawn-out collapses in modern memory. And the 2025 wave of U.S. sanctions, targeting Houthi-controlled financial structures, is fraying the few fragile threads that were holding the economy together. Over 80% of Yemen's population depends on humanitarian aid just to survive. Since the war began, the Yemeni rial has lost more than 90% of its value. But here's the harsh truth. This devastation wasn't caused by war alone. The blockade fractured central banking systems, and now the latest sanctions have severed vital remittance channels and choked off informal trade routes. On the ground, this means doctors earn the equivalent of just $3 a month. Diesel, if available, costs more than a week's income. Children are dying, not from bombs, but from hunger, from infections that would be easily treatable elsewhere, in a healthcare system that has completely collapsed. Ports operate under constant threat. Banks are divided between competing governments. Inflation has devoured what little hope families had. The private sector is gone. Government workers go unpaid. The middle class has all but disappeared. Then came 2025 sanctions targeting crypto networks and Houthi-linked shipping companies, some of the last remaining lifelines to the outside world. Aid organizations now warn of famine once again looming over the horizon. In cities like Taiz, Sada, and Al-Hadaydah, the future isn't just uncertain, it's uninhabitable. Before we go further, please subscribe, like, and share this video so we can keep exposing the urgent realities the world too often overlooks. Because in Yemen, collapse didn't come with explosions, it came with silence. No salaries. No food. No escape. And it's all happening now. Number 4. Lebanon. Banks that refuse to give you your own money. Grocery prices that double in mere weeks. A minimum wage worth less than $20. This is Lebanon, once hailed as the Switzerland of the Middle East, now a textbook example of how corruption, debt, and economic implosion can destroy a nation. And in 2025, tougher U.S. sanctions may push it right over the edge. This isn't some future projection, it's an economic catastrophe unfolding in real time. Since 2019, the Lebanese pound has lost more than 98% of its value. What once cost £1,000 now demands $100,000. And 2025 sanctions, aimed at Hezbollah-linked financial institutions, have triggered even more capital flight and further paralyzed the banking sector. The most alarming part? Lebanon no longer has a functioning banking system. People are forced to rely on dollars, U.S. dollar deposits they can't withdraw or convert. Many now stash life savings in mattresses because banks have effectively become sealed vaults. Electricity? Most of the country relies on private generators, with only a few hours of state-supplied power per day. Hospitals are losing doctors to emigration, running on fumes. Public education is crippled by strikes and delays caused by unpaid salaries. In some wealthy areas, a thin veneer of normalcy remains, but across the broader country, everything is breaking down. The middle class has vanished. Professionals are fleeing. Once thriving neighborhoods are now silent, shuttered, and sinking into despair. And here's the tragedy. Lebanon has the talent, the diaspora, and the cultural richness to rebuild. But it has lost something harder to regain: trust. Trust in banks, leaders, currency, and even the future. If one more shock hits, whether conflict, sanctions, or regional spillover, Lebanon may not have the systems left to survive. And when trust dies, institutions die with it. Number 3. Pakistan. What happens when a nuclear-armed nation can't even afford to keep the lights on? Pakistan stands at a dangerous crossroads. With over 240 million citizens, it now faces economic tremors powerful enough to unseat governments, crash currencies, and trigger irreversible spirals. Fuel prices have skyrocketed. Cities suffer blackouts up to 12 hours a day. In early 2025, foreign reserves fell so low that Pakistan could only cover 2 weeks' worth of imports. This isn't just a crisis, it's a real-time economic breakdown. The Pakistani rupee has plummeted by more than 60% over the past 2 years. Inflation has surged past 35%, while food prices in cities like Lahore and Karachi have doubled. Families are skipping meals. Pharmacies are out of critical medications. Schools shut down early due to energy shortages. Here's what few are acknowledging openly. The latest U.S. sanctions on dual-use technologies and clandestine military procurement networks have added crushing pressure to an already fragile system. While these sanctions don't directly target the population, they scared off investors, disrupted logistics, and frozen deals with key global partners. Pakistan's debt exceeds $125 billion, much of it owed to external creditors. IMF bailouts have become routine, but they bring painful conditions, tax increases, subsidy cuts, and price hikes that disproportionately hurt the poor. Protests are escalating. Grid failures are growing more common. Political tensions rise with every missed paycheck. Could Pakistan handle another monsoon disaster? Another energy crisis? A regional conflict? Because right now, the country isn't just strained, it's trapped. And before we move on, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share so we can keep bringing you stories the world ignores. For Pakistan, the question isn't when recovery will come, it's whether collapse can still be avoided. Number 2. Cambodia. What happens when a nation builds its future on cheap labor and foreign cash, only to see both vanish overnight? Cambodia's rapid development once turned heads. Gleaming towers in Phnom Penh, surging garment exports. But beneath that facade, deep structural weaknesses are widening. More than 80% of Cambodia's exports rely on the garment sector, and most of that goes to Western countries. But in 2025, U.S. sanctions began targeting corrupt elites, military-backed businesses, and those tied to land seizures. At the same time, Cambodia's trade privileges under the Generalized System of Preferences are under review. This means reduced access to duty-free exports, and the blow to the economy has been swift. Meanwhile, the country is drowning in Chinese debt. Billions were poured into roads, casinos, and special zones. Now, the bills are due, and Cambodia is struggling to pay. As factories close and wages vanish, young workers are leaving the country in search of better opportunities. But the real danger isn't just economic, it's social. As the income gap widens and state control tightens, freedom is shrinking. Independent journalism has been muzzled. Political opposition has been stamped out. Economic opportunity increasingly depends on loyalty to those in power. Tourism, once a vital backup source of income, hasn't fully bounced back from the pandemic. Climate change is putting rice harvests at risk, hurting rural provinces hardest. If sanctions expand or investor confidence continues to crumble, Cambodia faces a slow but unstoppable breakdown, not through explosions, but through quiet erosion. Number 1. Sri Lanka. How does a country fall from paradise to panic so fast? In Sri Lanka, collapse doesn't whisper, it shouts. Empty shelves in grocery stores. Cities left dark by endless blackouts. Long lines outside gas stations filled with anger and desperation. Once celebrated as a rising tourism hotspot and a middle-income success story, this island nation has plunged into one of Asia's most devastating economic collapses. And even now, in 2025, it's still balancing on the brink. What caused it? A dangerous mix of unsustainable debt, weak governance, heavy reliance on imports, and yes, sanctions. Although the United States hasn't imposed sweeping direct sanctions on Sri Lanka, the global financial tightening of 2025 has delivered a punishing blow. Increased scrutiny of dollar transactions, restrictions on military-affiliated trade, and indirect fallout from sanctions on Russia and Iran have all drained the country's revenue streams. Sri Lanka depends on imports for nearly everything: fuel, food, and more, and with foreign reserves still at dangerously low levels, it simply cannot keep up. Inflation soared to over 85% at its worst. The Sri Lankan rupee collapsed. School exams had to be called off due to a shortage of paper. Public transport came to a halt. Even after the International Monetary Fund stepped in with a bailout, the suffering continues. Harsh austerity measures have slashed subsidies, taxes have surged, and electricity bills have tripled. Now the nation is walking a razor's edge. Foreign investment remains elusive, tourism is fragile, and political tensions are once again bubbling to the surface. The question is no longer just whether Sri Lanka can recover, but whether this crisis is only the beginning of something even more catastrophic. Because once a country runs out of trust, fuel, and hope, what's left to keep the lights on? As major world powers increase pressure, these 10 countries stand at the precipice, some already slipping. Sanctions may be aimed at governments, but it's the ordinary people who feel the pain first. To help keep these hidden realities in the spotlight, make sure to subscribe, like, and share this video. The world is changing rapidly, stay alert before the shock hits home.